In 1966, 3 cemetery workers took the night shift at Riverside Cemetery outside Point Pleasant, expecting nothing more than routine maintenance and the occasional teenage trespasser. But something massive began appearing among the headstones after midnight. Red eyes burned in the darkness, wings unfurled wider than any bird known to West Virginia. Then workers started having the same dream about a bridge collapsing. Before we continue, please make sure to leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. I started at Riverside Cemetery in September of 1966, when the previous groundskeeper quit without notice or explanation. The cemetery sprawled across 40 acres of rolling hills overlooking the Ohio River, with sections dating back to the 1,850 seconds. Stone angels, weathered smooth by decades of rain, stood watch over family plots, enclosed by rusted iron fences. The newer sections held neat rows of flat markers that made mowing easier, but lacked the character of the old Victorian monuments. Between these sections ran narrow paths barely wide enough for a hearse, their edges crumbling from years of frost and thaw cycles. There were 3 of us on the night shift. Walter Briggs ran the crew, a thin man in his 50s, with deep-set eyes and hands, permanently stained by soil. He had worked the cemetery for 20 years and knew every plot, every name, every story the locals told about lights in the older sections. His knowledge went beyond mere employment. He could tell you which families still visited, which graves had been forgotten, which sections flooded during heavy rain. Marcus Cole was built like a linebacker, young and eager for any work that paid decent wages. He had returned from Vietnam the previous year with a limp that disappeared when he thought no one was watching. Sometimes, during our breaks, I caught him staring at nothing, his jaw working as if chewing on memories he couldn't swallow. I was between them in age and temperament, 32 years old, steady enough to handle the isolation but still unsettled by the deeper shadows between the crypts. The job itself was straightforward. We maintained the grounds after regular hours when funeral services would not be disrupted. We repaired headstones loosened by frost, cleared fallen branches, filled in sunken graves where old wooden coffins had finally collapsed, and ensured the gates remained locked against vandals. The night work paid better than day shifts, and the cemetery board preferred having someone on site at all hours. Too many stones had been toppled by kids looking for thrills in previous years. The local paper had run several stories about vandalism, putting pressure on the board to increase security. Walter met me at the maintenance shed that first night, a converted carriage house that smelled of motor oil and grass clippings. The building dated from the cemetery's earliest days, its walls thick limestone that kept the interior cool, even in summer. The walls held shovels, rakes, and picks, alongside more modern equipment. A small office in the back contained filing cabinets, stuffed with burial records going back a century, maps of the grounds marked with different colored ink for different eras, and a coffee pot that never seemed clean enough. The single window looked out toward the oldest section, where elaborate mausoleums stood like small houses for the dead. "First thing you learn," Walter said while showing me around, "is that cemeteries are louder at night than people think. Stones settle, trees creak, animals dig. If you jump at every sound, you will not last the week." He pulled out a worn notebook from a drawer. "I keep a log of the regular sounds. Takes about a month to learn them all. The big oak in Section 4 groans when the wind comes from the north. The iron fence around the Clemens plot rattles in anything stronger than a breeze. Foxes den under the Graham Mausoleum every spring." Marcus arrived shortly after, parking his pickup beside the shed. The truck had seen better days, rust eating through the wheel wells, but he kept it running with the mechanical knowledge he'd picked up in the service. He walked with deliberate care across the gravel, favoring his left leg slightly. "Another warm one," he said, though September had brought cooler air to the valley, "means more grass to cut tomorrow." We loaded the equipment onto a small utility cart, its engine coughing before settling into a steady rumble. The cart could hold our tools, bags of gravel for repairs, and a small generator for work lights when we needed them. Walter had modified it with brackets for shovels and a locked box for the more expensive equipment. Someone had stolen tools the previous year, walking right into the shed during a shift change. The cemetery roads were narrow, barely wide enough for a hearse, winding between sections with names like Eternal Rest and Garden of Memory. Our headlights carved short tunnels through the darkness. Beyond their reach, the headstones emerged as pale shapes against darker grass. Some caught the light and threw it back in unexpected ways, creating the illusion of movement that had frightened more than one new worker over the years. "We work in sections," Walter explained as we drove. "Tonight, we're filling a depression in Block 7 and resetting stones in the old Presbyterian corner. Should take us to dawn if nothing else comes up." He steered carefully around a pothole that had been growing wider each spring. "Board keeps promising to repave these roads. Been saying that since I started. What else would come up?" I asked. Marcus laughed, short and harsh. "Kids, mostly. Some nights we chase them off 3 or 4 times. They climb the fence over by the river section thinking no one watches that side. Last month we found beer cans and cigarette butts all around the Confederate memorial. Took photos of everything for the police, not that they did much about it." Walter steered around a large oak whose roots had begun lifting nearby markers. "Sometimes we get visitors who lost someone recent. They stand at graves all night talking to stones. We leave them be unless they bring bottles. Grief makes people do strange things. Found a woman sleeping on her husband's grave once. Had brought a pillow and blanket. We let her stay until dawn, then drove her home." The Presbyterian section occupied the highest ground in the cemetery, a hill that offered views of the river during daylight. The stones here were tall, thin slabs of limestone, carved with Bible verses and hands pointing toward heaven. Several had tilted forward over the years, threatening to fall. The original Presbyterian church had burned in 1892, taking its records with it. So many of these graves were mysteries even to Walter's encyclopedic knowledge. We worked methodically. Walter showed me how to dig around a stone's base without damaging it, how to use wooden wedges and levels to achieve the proper angle, how to pack earth and gravel to prevent future shifting. The work was harder than expected. Sweat soaked through my shirt despite the cool air. Each stone weighed hundreds of pounds, and moving them even slightly required careful leverage and patience. "Used to be worse," Walter said during a water break. "Before the backhoe, we did everything by hand. Dug graves in January when the ground was frozen solid. Took 2 days sometimes. Had to build fires on the ground to thaw it enough to break through." He pointed to a section near the fence. "Lost a man back in 48. Heart gave out digging a grave in summer heat. Buried him 3 plots over from where he fell." Marcus worked apart from us, using a pry bar to straighten a row of smaller markers. His movements were efficient, practiced, but I noticed he kept scanning the tree line that bordered the cemetery's eastern edge, his head snapping toward any rustle in the underbrush. The trees there were older growth, massive oaks and maples that had never been cleared. Their branches hung over the fence in places, creating tunnels of darkness even our work lights couldn't penetrate. "See something?" I called. He shook his head but continued watching. "Deer, probably. They come through to eat the flowers people leave. Sometimes you can see their eyes reflecting in the dark. Makes your heart skip until you realize what it is." By midnight, we had reset 7 stones and started on the depression in Block 7. This newer section held veterans from World War II, their markers uniform white marble with military insignia. The depression was roughly circular, about 6 feet across, as if something beneath had collapsed. The grass around it had yellowed despite recent rain, forming a ring of sick-looking turf. "Old septic system," Walter said, though he frowned as he examined it. "Cemetery used to have restrooms near here in the 30s. Board had them removed, but never mapped where the tanks were buried." He knelt and pressed his hand to the ground. "Feels solid enough. Probably just settling after all these years." We began filling the hole with wheelbarrows of dirt from a pile near the shed. The work was monotonous, but necessary. As we worked, I became aware of how quiet the cemetery had grown. The normal sounds Walter had described, the settling and creaking, had stopped. Even the insects had gone silent. The absence of sound was more noticeable than any noise would have been. Marcus noticed it too. He stood still, shovel hanging loose in his grip, turning slowly to survey the darkness around us. "Something's wrong," he said quietly. His voice carried the tone of someone who had learned to trust their instincts in dangerous places. Walter kept shoveling, but his movements had tensed. "Keep working. Probably just a fox or coyote passing through. Spooks everything else." A smell reached us then, sharp and chemical, like sulfur mixed with something metallic. It seemed to come from the tree line Marcus had been watching earlier. The odor grew stronger, making my eyes water. It was nothing like the usual cemetery smells of cut grass, turned earth, or even the occasional whiff of decay from older sections where drainage was poor. "What is that?" I asked, covering my nose with my shirt sleeve. Walter's face had gone pale in the cart's work lights. "I don't know. 20 years here and I've never smelled anything like that." A sound followed the smell. Not quite a screech, not quite a whistle, but something between them. High-pitched and prolonged, it seemed to come from above us rather than the trees. All three of us looked up simultaneously. The sound continued for several seconds, wavering slightly in pitch before cutting off abruptly. Red eyes stared down from the top of a memorial obelisk 20 feet away. They did not reflect our lights like animal eyes would. They glowed with their own light, two burning points that did not blink. The shape around them was harder to define, a darkness that seemed denser than the night, roughly man-shaped but wrong in proportion. The obelisk stood 15 feet tall, commemorating a Civil War colonel, and whatever perched on top of it made the substantial monument look fragile. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered. His hand had moved instinctively to his hip, where a sidearm would have been in another time and place. The thing shifted, and I saw wings unfold. Not bird wings with feathers, but something that looked more like membrane, stretched over bone. They extended impossibly wide, at least 10 feet from tip to tip, blocking out stars as they spread. The membrane appeared to have a texture like leather, with visible veins or supports running through it. Where the wings joined the body, I could see what might have been arms separate from the wing structure itself. Walter grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. Back to the cart. Slow. No running. His voice was steady, but I could feel his hand trembling. We moved as a group, never turning our backs on the thing. It watched us retreat, those red eyes tracking our movement. The glow from them pulsed slightly, growing brighter and dimmer in a rhythm that might have been breathing. When we were halfway to the cart, it lifted off the obelisk, with a sound like canvas snapping in wind. The wings beat once, twice, and it rose straight up, disappearing into the darkness above. The memorial where it had perched showed deep gouges in the granite, as if massive talons had gripped it. Marcus was first to the cart, starting it before Walter and I had fully climbed aboard. We drove fast toward the shed, the cart bouncing dangerously on the narrow roads. Behind us, that strange whistling screech came again, farther away but still too close. It seemed to echo off the stones around us, making it impossible to tell exactly where the creature had gone. Inside the shed, Walter locked the door and went straight to the phone on the office wall. His hands shook as he dialed. The old rotary phone clicked with each number, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet shed. "Who are you calling?" I asked. "Nobody," he said after a long pause. "Line's dead." Marcus checked the windows, peering out into the darkness. Maybe it hit a phone line when it flew off. He had grabbed a crowbar from the wall and held it like a weapon, though we all knew how useless it would be against something that size. "Maybe," Walter said, but doubt colored his voice. He tried the phone again, tapping the receiver cradle, but no dial tone came. We spent the rest of that shift in the shed. Walter brewed coffee with hands that still trembled slightly. The familiar ritual seemed to calm him, measuring grounds, filling the percolator, setting it on the hot plate. Marcus cleaned tools that didn't need cleaning, running a rag over shovels and picks with obsessive attention. I sat at the desk, trying to write an incident report but unable to find words that wouldn't sound insane. "You ever see anything like that before?" I asked Walter. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. "No. Heard stories, though. Other cemeteries, other grounds crews, things that don't fit any animal we know. but I never believed them. Figured it was just talk to make the job seem more interesting than it is. He pulled out his notebook and began sketching what we'd seen, his hand still unsteady. My predecessor, the man who had this job before me, he left some notes in the back of the filing cabinet, mentioned red eyes watching from trees, mentioned that sulfur smell. I thought he'd been drinking. What happened to him? Marcus asked. Quit one day. No notice, no explanation. Found his keys on this desk with a note that just said, I'm done. Walter tapped his pencil against the notebook. That was 20 years ago. I never gave it much thought until tonight. What do we tell the board? Marcus asked. Nothing, Walter said firmly. We report a downed phone line and leave it at that. They'll think we're drunk or crazy if we mention whatever that was. Dawn came slowly, the sky lightening in stages from black to deep purple to gray. We ventured out cautiously, checking corners and scanning the sky before moving between buildings. The cemetery looked normal in the growing light, peaceful even. We found no sign of the creature except for deep scratches on top of the obelisk where it had perched. The gouges were 3 inches deep in solid granite, arranged in a pattern that suggested 3 forward-facing talons and 1 rear, like a massive bird of prey. The phone line was indeed down, torn clean through about 100 yards from the shed. The break was too clean for wind damage, the copper wire pulled apart as if something had gripped it and yanked. The next 2 nights passed without incident. We worked different sections, always staying together, always finishing before midnight. Walter had brought a camera, an old brownie he kept in his jacket pocket. Marcus carried a tire iron in addition to his usual tools. I found myself checking the sky constantly, searching for any shadow that moved wrong. We didn't discuss what we'd seen, but the shared experience had changed the dynamic between us. We moved like soldiers in hostile territory, covering angles, maintaining sight lines, never letting our guard down completely. On the 4th night, it returned. We were installing a new grave marker in Block 12 when the smell hit again. Sulfur and metal, stronger than before. This time, we saw it land. It dropped from the sky onto a large family crypt, its wings folding against its body as it touched down. The crypt roof, made of solid marble, cracked audibly under its weight. In the beam of our flashlights, more details emerged. The body was gray-brown, like old leather that had been exposed to weather. Its shape was vaguely human but stretched, with arms that seemed too long and legs that bent in too many places. The torso was barrel-shaped and powerful, muscles visible beneath the skin as it moved. The head was the worst part. Where a face should be, there were only those red eyes, burning above something that might have been a mouth or might have been shadow. No visible nose, no ears that I could see, just smooth skin pulled tight over a skull that seemed the wrong shape for anything that should exist. Walter raised the camera and managed one photo before the thing screeched. The sound was painful, a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I felt a pressure in my sinuses, like diving too deep in water. When it stopped, the creature was gone, launched back into the darkness so quickly we hadn't seen it leave. The crypt, where it had perched, showed new cracks radiating from the impact point. Got it, Walter said, hands shaking worse than before. Got a picture. But when he had the film developed days later at the pharmacy in town, the image showed only a bright blur against darkness, like someone had photographed a streetlight through fog. The pharmacist asked if he'd had trouble with his camera. Walter just nodded and paid for the development without explaining. Marcus started having dreams after that night. He told us about them during our breaks, voice low and uncertain. In the dreams, he stood on a bridge, cars all around him in evening traffic, Christmas lights strung along the cables, shoppers heading home with packages. Then something gave way. Metal screamed. The bridge folded like paper, dropping cars into dark water below. He could see faces in the car windows, mouths open in screams he couldn't hear. He woke from these dreams gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. It's just nerves, Walter told him. That thing has us all on edge. But I had begun having similar dreams. The same bridge, the same collapse, the same dark water. Details varied, but the core remained constant. In my dreams, I sometimes saw the creature perched on the bridge's superstructure, watching as it fell. Its red eyes never blinked, never looked away from the catastrophe below. Sometimes I was on the bridge when it collapsed, feeling the roadway tilt and break beneath my feet. Sometimes I watched from the shore as cars disappeared into black water that looked thick as oil. We researched during daylight hours. The town library had newspaper archives going back to the 1800s. We found nothing about creatures with red eyes and wings, but we found other things. Accounts of strange lights over the river, stories of prophetic dreams that preceded mine, collapses and floods, a pattern of sightings that seemed to cluster before disasters. In 1907, before a mine explosion that killed 30 men, workers reported a dark figure watching from the pit head. In 1928, before the collapse of the Silver Bridge's predecessor during construction, residents saw red lights moving along the partially completed span. Maybe it's a warning, Marcus suggested one afternoon. We sat in a diner downtown, far from the cemetery, drinking coffee and comparing notes. The normal sounds of clinking dishes and conversation felt strange after so many quiet nights. Maybe it appears when something bad is going to happen. Walter dismissed this with a wave. You're connecting dots that don't connect. Strange things happen. Bad things happen. Doesn't mean they're related. But the dreams persisted and spread. Other cemetery workers on the day shift mentioned nightmares about bridges. A woman visiting her husband's grave told us she had seen red eyes in her bedroom window and now dreamed of twisted metal and dark water every night. The local priest mentioned during a service that several parishioners had come to him with troubling dreams about disasters. October brought shorter days and longer nights. We adjusted our schedule, arriving earlier, but the darkness seemed heavier than in September. The creature appeared more frequently. Sometimes just the eyes watching from a tree line. Sometimes the full shape landing on monuments before taking off at our approach. Always that smell preceding it, that screech following. We started finding dead animals around the cemetery, not killed and eaten like natural predation, but crushed from above, their bodies pressed into the ground with tremendous force. Walter's documentation grew more detailed. He sketched what we saw, recorded dates and times, noted weather conditions and moon phases. Looking for patterns, he said, though I think he was trying to make sense of something that refused logic. His notebook filled with drawings of wing positions, estimates of size based on landmarks, theories about origin scrawled in margins. He corresponded with a professor at the university who studied folklore, though he never mentioned our direct encounters, only asked about historical accounts of flying creatures. On October 20th, things changed. We were repairing a section of fence near the river overlook when Marcus suddenly doubled over, clutching his head. "The bridge!" he gasped. "It's happening now. I can see it happening now." Before we could respond, the creature landed on the fence directly in front of us. This close, I could see texture in its skin, like old leather that had been stretched and dried. The red eyes were not uniform but seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. The wings, folded now, still blocked out a significant portion of sky. I could smell it clearly, that sulfur and metal odor mixed with something organic and wrong, like meat left in the sun. It stood there, maybe 7 feet tall, regarding us with those burning eyes. The fence posts on either side of it bent outward from its weight. Then it spoke. Not with a mouth, but somehow directly into our minds. The words were not English or any language I knew, but I understood them anyway. The sensation was violating, like something pressing into my skull. The Silver Bridge. 46 days. The water is cold. Images flooded my mind. A bridge packed with evening traffic, Christmas decorations glowing in the twilight, the sound of carols on car radios, then a sharp crack like a gunshot, metal tearing, cars sliding backward as the roadway tilted, the dark water of the Ohio River swallowing everything. I saw faces pressed against windows, presents scattered across back seats, a child's toy floating in black water. Then it was gone, launched upward with such force that we were knocked backward by the wind from its wings. Walter helped Marcus to his feet. Did you hear that? Both of you? We had. The same message, the same certainty that it was not a warning but a statement of fact. Something would happen to a bridge in 46 days. Silver Bridge, Marcus said, still holding his head. That's the one into Point Pleasant. I drive it twice a week. We tried to warn people. Walter went to the police, who listened politely and did nothing. The officer taking his statement kept looking at him strangely, asking if he'd been drinking, if he was taking any medications. I wrote to the newspaper, which didn't print the letter. The editor returned it with a note suggesting I seek help for stress. Marcus told anyone who would listen, earning a reputation as troubled, possibly disturbed from his time in the war. The creature appeared almost nightly now, sometimes multiple times. Other people saw it too. Couples parking near the cemetery reported red eyes and wings. A group of teenagers claimed it chased their car, flying above them at impossible speeds. The town began calling it Mothman, though moth seemed inadequate for something so large and purposeful. The name trivialized it, turned it into something from a comic book rather than the herald of disaster we knew it to be. November passed in a blur of sightings and dreams. The dreams had become more specific, not just a bridge collapsing, but particular details. Christmas lights strung on the cables, evening traffic. The sound of carols on car radios cut short by screaming metal. I could see license plate numbers, faces of drivers, the pattern on a woman's scarf as she gripped her steering wheel in terror. Walter grew haggard, sleeping poorly when he slept at all. His documentation had filled 3 notebooks. He had theories about electromagnetic fields, about precognition, about creatures from dimensions beyond our perception. None of it explained what we were experiencing. He started drinking, just a little at first, then more. I found empty bottles in the shed that he tried to hide behind equipment. Marcus stopped coming to work after Thanksgiving. He called to say he couldn't face the cemetery anymore, couldn't risk seeing those eyes again. He was leaving town, getting as far from bridges as possible. I didn't blame him. The weight of knowledge we couldn't share, couldn't act on, was crushing. To know that people would die and be unable to prevent it was its own kind of torture. December brought snow and fewer sightings. The creature seemed to have delivered its message and withdrawn. But the dreams continued, growing more vivid as the 46 days counted down. I started recognizing faces in the dreams, people I'd seen around town, the woman who worked at the hardware store, the man who delivered milk, all of them on the bridge when it fell. On December 15th, 46 days after the creature's message, I was home sick with flu. Walter worked alone that night, maintaining the cemetery in light snow. He called me the next morning, voice shaking. "Did you hear?" he asked. "Hear what?" "The Silver Bridge. It collapsed during rush hour yesterday evening, full of Christmas shopping traffic." I sat up too quickly, making my fevered head spin. How many? They're still counting. Dozens of cars in the water. They're saying 46 dead so far. 46 days. 46 dead. The number was not coincidence. Walter and I never spoke directly about the connection. What could we say? That we had been warned by something impossible? That we had tried to prevent it but no one listened? The weight of that knowledge sat between us, unspoken but always present. The creature appeared once more, 3 days after the collapse. I was working alone, Walter having taken leave to attend funerals for bridge victims he had known. I was replacing flowers on recent graves when the familiar smell reached me. It stood atop the cemetery's entrance gate, wings spread against the stars. Those red eyes regarded me with what might have been acknowledgement, or might have been nothing at all. Then it spoke again, not in words, but in images flooding my mind. Other bridges, other collapses, other disasters yet to come. Places I didn't recognize, times I couldn't determine. A mine in West Virginia, a building in New York. Events scattered across years I hadn't lived yet. Then it was gone. Not just fled, but truly gone. The smell faded. The oppressive weight that had hung over the cemetery for months lifted. Whatever message it had come to deliver was complete. I finished that shift and never returned to Riverside Cemetery. The weight of what we'd witnessed, What we'd failed to prevent was too much. Walter lasted another month before retiring, claiming health issues. The cemetery hired new workers who knew nothing of what we had seen. Life continued as if nothing had happened, as if 46 people hadn't died in cold black water, while 3 cemetery workers carried the burden of foreknowledge. I moved to Colorado, finding work as a school janitor. Mountains all around, no major bridges for hundreds of miles, but sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, I smell sulfur and metal. I check the sky for red eyes and spreading wings, and I dream of disasters I cannot prevent, warnings I cannot deliver in any way that would be believed. The Mothman, or whatever name we give to something beyond naming, serves a purpose we don't understand. Herald or warning, observer or participant, it appears when the fabric of normal life is about to tear. We who saw it carry that knowledge forever, isolated by truth too strange for the world to accept. Some nights, that weight feels heavier than others. Tonight is one of those nights. The wind has stopped. The darkness is complete. And though I know it's probably imagination, I swear I can smell sulfur and metal on the mountain air. I check the sky and wait, as I have waited for decades now, still watching, still remembering, still knowing that somewhere, the Mothman spreads its wings, and another warning is about to be delivered to witnesses who will not be believed until it's too late. The pattern continues, endless and unbreaking, and we who have seen it can only watch and remember, carrying the weight of truth that no one wants to hear.